Another episode of The Due to Bidens. I'm going to be doing a video here where I'm both thrashing and propping up Joe Biden. If you don't like that, don't watch. I'm also a liberal, but I'm also a person who's in favor of abolishing the Second Amendment because I want to see what happens. Most frequently stolen guns. This is based on the statistics I could find. 38 revolver, 20%. 12%, 223 or 22 caliber rimfire revolvers because they're small. That's 22 Magnum, 22 short, 22 long rifle, 22 extra long, 22 CB, and 22 CB cap and BB cap. Look all of those up. About 12%, the 357 revolver. 357, if you're not aware of it, just go look it up. And then at like maybe 9% is 9mm semi-automatics. The reason for it being semi-automatic versus all of these revolvers is whether or not the cartridge easily stacks without it being jankied into weird positions and make it to work and feed correctly. Some cartridges are made to go into a semi-automatic feed system. Some cartridges are meant to be fed by a magazine or only be in a revolver. 1985 versus 1990s homicides. 44% originally in the old days were 38 revolver. 23% were 9mm by 1990. 19% in the old days was 25 pistol, 25 caliber ACP, one of the weakest guns on the planet, but it was still used in homicides. 18%, second runner-up by 1990, was the 38 revolver. If you're not aware of what 9mm and 38 refer to, 38 is 0.38 inches. Look up what 9mm is. One of them is an auto, one of them is a revolver. 6 shots or maybe 7 or maybe 5, depending on what you're doing. 9mm, you can have an extended magazine. Just kind of make one. 14% in the 1980s were 22 revolvers. 22 short, Magnum, they're all thrown into the same category. But by 1990s, it was the 357 revolver in that third place mark. In the 1980s, a 9mm pistol was used 3% of the time and was not a concern in murders. By 1990, it was the number one used homicide weapon. See also that a bunch of Saturday Night Special and weekly made firearms that were a problem in the 80s were outlawed. So the ones that weren't outlawed were used instead. Now we're going to consult the Joe Biden quote and him misquoting someone. But here we go with a basic thing. 223, 5.56 AR-15 rifle bullets are 22 caliber bullets. Same thing with the 22 short that maybe your grandma carried when she was at a speakeasy. Actually, great-grandma for some of you. The AR-15 and also zinc semi-auto and revolver type cheap guns were made that way. 25 ACP is 25 caliber. That's bigger than the bullet that comes out of an AR-15. 9mm are also around 357 Magnum size, almost identical. Now they have, because the 9mm is bigger around than a 5mm, otherwise known as a 22, it has 2.62 times the surface area. So the hole it makes has more space for anything to go through. That'll be important in a minute. The assault weapons ban of 1994 named certain weapons. The Tech-9, the Mac-10, and Mac-11, which were 9mm firearms, because they were semi-auto versions of what was at one time a machine gun. Now, people don't discuss this, but the confusion of seeing what looks like a machine gun versus it being either converted over or explicitly built as not being a machine gun doesn't change the fact that it gives a very different response from the police. So far, here we go. By 1994, legislation had been passed to outlaw 9mm firearms, also some 22s, by the way. But also by 1990s, the lethality level of 9mm was perceived as being much more important, but the others were 357, 38 special. Those are all the same diameter bullet. One of them has less feeding issue in a semi-auto. .357 Magnum revolver bullets in a magazine-fed firearm is a bit difficult. See also .22 caliber cartridges being put into a magazine that has that banana clip shape because of the shape of the bullet and the cartridge and the rim and everything getting in the way. Also reliability issues because it's not center fire. In handguns above .38 caliber, they're called large caliber, and below that they're called small caliber. .38 Special or .380, 9mm and .357 are right on the cutoff point at .38 caliber. They really are at or around .38 caliber. And if you look up the actual diameters, they have some variation to it. In a rifle above .30 caliber, full 30 as they call it, is considered larger caliber or large. Anything smaller than that, like .223 or .22 caliber or .17 caliber, are considered small calibers. Go really small when you go small. Above .50 caliber is the destructive device range, where regulation can be applied if they want to. And in handguns, it's illegal in some of them. And most rifles. 12 gauges start at 73. It's 72.9, but it's a 73 caliber firearm. 36-year tenured Delaware Senator Joe Biden, 1972 to 2008, said something on May 30th, 2022 at 9:15 a.m. in the morning, right after getting off of a helicopter, with probably very little coffee in his system. He said sometime in the early to mid-90s, when he was just starting his hearings on what a rational gun law should be started as. This is also the law that effectively banned AR-15s unless you wanted to register them in some way. Started. Now, he said at the time, he says that the death rate was going up from shootings, but the number of shootings wasn't going up, quote, that much, or not as much. You can look up the statistics on the number of shootings, but he said this was in general, or in New York. He wasn't being very specific. He said he sat down with a New York City trauma hospital doctor or surgeon and asked him, what's the difference? Why are they dying more often than they statistically should? He said they showed him x-rays. And one of them said a .22 caliber bullet will lodge in the lung. I'm pretty sure we can say .22 short and .22 long rifle and .22 Magnum, not .22 or .556 NATO rounds, rifles. This is probably handgun. We can probably get it out, maybe be able to get it out. We can maybe save their life. A 9mm blows the lung out of the body. And then he said some other things. So we're going to cover this really quickly. Because the surface area is over 2.5 times the amount of surface area, a .22 caliber wound, in many cases, especially into the chest, will self-seal and may be plugged without you having to do anything by bits of cloth or just your clothing getting sopping wet with blood, or it just may seal on its own. A 9mm hole that causes a sucking chest wound won't fucking seal in many cases, so the death rate's higher. The death rate's actually listed as being higher for 9mm simply because it just makes a bigger hole. It's at .357 diameter, not .38 caliber, so it's not really high caliber. It's actually considered small caliber, or smaller, very much not large caliber. Now, as for what a 9mm bullet would do in a trauma ward, a real trauma surgeon or doctor would just say the 9mm bullets make a bigger hole. If it hits the lung, it makes a hole in it. This means the lung will collapse and the person dies from asphyxiation. And if it exits the chest because it's a full metal jacket, it will drag out parts of the lung and make 2 holes front and back in the chest and 2 holes front and back in the lung, because most shots come from the front. Obviously that would be accurate if it did actually penetrate the chest. Look up the 9mm test on Paul Harrell with a meat target. If it hits a rib, it would fracture the rib, splinter it, drive pieces into the lung, and make multiple holes. But that would reduce your chance of having a sucking chest wound. The other thing that came out at the time, look up Black Talon and when that came out. That's not necessarily related, obviously, but hollow point bullets, which are used for self-defense, are designed to hit and expand within an inch or two and take out as much tissue as possible to cause a lot of blood loss instantly, to cause the person to essentially lose consciousness. One of the benefits of that is if you hit a person, depending on where you hit them, they won't die. They just literally faint because they don't have the ability to maintain blood pressure. They drop and you can get away from them. You're not supposed to stand there. Don't stand your ground. Run the fuck away. If you need to save your life, Save it. But the point is that that didn't happen all the time. Also in the 1990s, police departments switched over to 9mm and said specifically all sorts of things like they explode or whatever. They don't. They really don't. There is simply no rational basis for it in terms of thinking about self-protection, hunting, and then he also mentioned money or something. And then he says, the idea of these high-caliber weapons. And then he interrupts himself, because Joe Biden interrupts himself the entire time he's existed. I don't think he's ever let himself finish a sentence. I don't think anybody has to interrupt him. When the Second Amendment was passed, please understand what the word amendment means before you say anything. Original intentions of the Founding Fathers, but here's an amendment. You couldn't go out and purchase a lot of weapons. Joe Biden is simply wrong about that, period, full stop. In some areas, you were forbidden from buying over a certain amount, or if you weren't a specific class, you couldn't, or a specific shade. When was the Second Amendment passed? What was going on at the time? You couldn't buy a cannon. Yes, I'm pretty sure at the time you could, but maybe not, depending on where you were. Is a cannon regulated now? Cannons are one of the least regulated weapons on the planet, not firearm. Shotguns are almost as unregulated as that. A long rifle that looks old is unregulatable because people won't complain about it. Again, I don't care if there's a Second Amendment. I just will make sure that nothing I own is anything related to a gun. Don't need one. Did you know crossbows aren't regulated in any way? I mean, well, let's move on. Next thing. You can make a cannon out of anything anyway. But at the time, you could buy as many weapons as you wanted to and have a cannon depending on where you stood, what hunk of dirt you were on, and whether or not anybody could catch you with it. So Joe Biden is very much wrong about that. Now we're going to get to the NRA explanation of everything. The original intentions of the Founding Fathers, if you base it on an inalienable, unassailable, unalterable Constitution, means the Second Amendment would be removed. I don't give a shit what you like or don't like about me saying it. That's factual. Look up when the Second Amendment was passed. Look up when it was proposed, who it was proposed by, what the reasoning was, and that they said it out loud. They said the quiet part out loud. And when the original Constitution was created. Now, you might want to look up the whole timeline for this, and then validation and acceptance of the Constitution, and it's a messy history. Other weapons also outlawed at the time included 22 caliber versions of some of these, by the way. The MPA 930 mini pistol, the 460 mini pistol, the tactical pistol by MPA, mini tactical pistol, I guess we have to combine that all together, by MPA. The Mac Ingram M11, Velocity Arms VMAC, the Sig Sauer something or other, and something called the Spectre. There were a bunch of them added on over the years after that. Reference point. At the time that this memory is created in Joe Biden's head, he's been in politics a very long time. The majority of his lifespan. One of the youngest that's ever been elected to office. He was dealing with what caused the assault weapons ban. And at the time he walked into a hospital, they very likely would have said 9mm were very deadly and did much more damage, because they do. They're larger diameter than 22s. Specifically comparing it to 22 long rifle, which is very common at the time. A 9mm would drop a person faster, especially if it was hollow point, and it could, if it was a full metal jacket, in some cases, go all the way through a person. And on its way out, it would rip out a piece of lung. Whether or not he's remembering this correctly is not relevant. Him saying that, being mocked, okay, I can understand it. Now I'm going to go into the main part of this video at the end. Politifact.com ignored every other thing that Joe Biden said that wasn't accurate. They went on and on about the NRA lying about certain things. The NRA fixating on the 9mm will blow your lung out thing is obviously hyperbole or hyperbole. But it isn't a lie to say that this shows a level of ignorance on his part, or simply a lack of memory being able to be communicated correctly, or Joe Biden simply didn't speak clearly. He needs to go check his notes and not speak off the cuff anymore. That's my recommendation. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And yes, a 9mm is more dangerous than a 22 fucking bullet. But then again, an AR-15 fires the same diameter bullet, but it's obviously different because it's coming out of a rifle instead of a handgun. Thanks for watching.